the imaginary lines that separate us from the rest of humanity are the origins of human conflict. These imaginary lines separate us with the illusions that we're somehow separate from others. We're deceived into thinking that our interests are separate from the interest of others. We're given the false impression that we live in an us versus them environment. It's natural that we think about life in a zero-sum environment. But are we really so different? Are we really so disconnected from others? Usually, we think of ourselves as our bodies. I'm in this body, you're in your body. And our bodies are mostly made up of air and water. Sure, there are other things in our body, but if you take the air and water out, there isn't much left. And in this short time that we have been together, all of us, I think it's safe to say, have been breathing. And in those breaths, most of what they contain is air and water. So I've been breathing in a little of you and breathing out a little of myself. And you have been breathing in a little of me and breathing out a little of yourselves. And all of us have been breathing in a little of the others and breathing out a little of ourselves. So in a very real way, I'm not like you. I am you. And you are me, and we are all together. So regardless of where you were born, when you were born, who your parents are, who your ancestors were, what political party you belong to, whether you're rich or poor, what religion you believe in, or what race you think you are, in a very real way, we are one. And the lines between us are imaginary. I want you to think for a moment about this imaginary line business. You know, in South Dakota, we are a cattle country. We have lots of cattle. And you go West River, and they have cattle out on the range. And one of the ways that they control the cattle is with something called a cattle guard. Now, the cattle can actually walk over that guard, but when they see it, they don't believe that they can. In fact, it's so deep in their brain that some places they don't make the cattle guard, they just draw lines. And the cattle think they can't go over it. But in a stampede, they go over. And then after that, they think they can't go back. The question is, are we smarter than cows? I want to give you an example of an imaginary line. One of the big ones is race. Now, we think about race quite a bit, but we don't think about it very deeply. You see, from a science or a rational point of view, we see that race is nothing more than sociological poppycock. But it's real strong poppycock. Now, many people have a big investment in this idea of race. They hold on to it even when it oppresses them. They hold on to the concept of race. But not many of them have ever tested the idea of race. Now, for those of you who are still somehow thinking that there is such a thing as race, riddle me this, Batman. Which race are you? Now, to answer that question, you have to have a definition of your race. You have to be able to answer the question, what do all of the members of my race have, yet none of the members in any other race have? If you don't know that, how do you know which race you belong to? If you can't answer that question, then how do you justify believing in this thing called race? By the way, those who have closely examined this subject have found out, we can't answer that question because there are no races. There's no body of science, no school of science that recognizes the concept of race because they actually think about it deeply. The rest of us, somebody told us we're this and we just go along. So the race, like other divisions, are really just holograms. They're figments of our imagination. They are hallucinations. They seem real, like the cattle guard, but they exist only in unexamined realities. These lines of separation are illusions that cause us to feel lonely and threatened. They cause us to compete rather than collaborate and cooperate. They allow us to harm ourselves while we think we are harming others. We need to erase these imaginary lines. Now, the way to erase those imaginary lines that separate us is we need to look for and focus on what we have in common rather than what we have in difference. We need to celebrate university as opposed to diversity. We need to explore and be aware of our interdependency. We have to look for ways to act that gives us a sense that we're cooperating and collaborating rather than competing. We have to value inclusivity over exclusivity. And we have to practice interaction with new people. We need to erase those imaginary lines because doing unto others is doing unto ourselves. Peace out.